We're here to talk about Pet Sematary. Yeah, Pet Sematary from Stephen King. It was the book version, which is like 1983. Don't quote me. I'll put it up if that's wrong. And here's the rating. And if you want to see why, that's off a 10-star rating. If you want to see why, we're going to have a summary blurb that they have on the beginning of the book. Then we're going to do the reasons why I rated that. And at the very end, we're going to do a spoiler summary. So stick around and hope you enjoy.
When Dr. Lewis Creed takes a new job and moves his family to an idyllic rural town of Ludlow, Maine, this new beginning seems too good to be true. Despite Ludlow's tranquility, an undercurrent of danger exists here. Those trucks on the road outside the Creed's beautiful old home travel by just a little too quick, for one thing, as is evidenced by the makeshift graveyard in the nearby woods whose generations of children have buried their beloved pets. Then there are warnings to Lewis, both real and from the depths of his nightmares, that he should not venture beyond the borders of the little grave where another burial. Then there are warnings to Lewis, both real and from the depths of his nightmares, that he should not venture beyond the borders of his little graveyard where another burial ground lures, with seductive promise and ungodly temptation. A blood-chilling truth is hidden there, one more terrifying than death itself, the hideous most powerful, as Lewis is about to discover for himself sometimes. Death is better.
Time to get into the nitty-gritty of Pet Sematary. I'm not going to run around the whole time. My legs are like noodles. I'm super sore. So if there's limited movement, that was very painful to do. Anyways, that's not the point. Let's get into the actual video. First, it's the POV is in third, and we follow one character most of the time. His name is Lewis, and he's basically the main character. And then he has a wife and a daughter. They just moved out to the country, and there's a friend there that we do get his point of view later in the book. So those are the 3 point of views. As far as the plot goes, it's well done, but it takes a really long time. I feel like all the older books do, and Stephen King kind of does as well. The first thing we need to talk about is how scary this book is, because it's a scary book. It's also fantasy. Most fantasy books are scary books. I will die on that hill. If there's anything fantastical happening, then it's a freaking, like it's a very popular movie. You get the premise. He has magical powers, therefore it's fantasy. Get over it. But this scary book wasn't scary to me. There was maybe 2 very short scenes where I was like, ooh, I was a little bit scared there, and it was at the very end. So it's not trying to scare you the whole time. Basically, the plot goes, set up for 3/4 of it, then the last quarter is some chaos, and it's more of not action and like scary and jump scares and terrifying and all that kind of stuff. What it really is basically having to do with grief. So he really goes into like the characters and how they act and that kind of thing. And let's just jump right into character. Perfect segue. Nailed it. Anyways, the main character, Lewis, is very thought out, and you get into his mind a lot, so you hear his thoughts a lot, which is awesome because you kind of see how he interacts. And like basically the whole time he has like a weird personality of like he's not psychotic, but he's almost like there's situations that you shouldn't laugh at, and in his head he like was making jokes the whole time and he's laughing, and it's basically how he's dealing with death. And he's a doctor, so he naturally does deal with death a lot in his job. So it's like basically the whole time he's making these weird things where you're like, probably shouldn't have that thought, but you're also saving people and not doing bad things, so you go for it, bud. And his wife, which talking about relationships, is basically on the opposite spectrum. She's like, death doesn't exist for me. I've had a bad childhood experience with it. I ignore all things death. Wow! Wall that sucker off. You stay on that side and laugh at it. I'll stay on this side and pretend it doesn't even exist. And they're raising a daughter, so they have to like, basically the premise is all about like death and how they're dealing with death and how they're going to raise the daughter to deal with death. And then also they pile on some fantasy, or Steven piles on some fantasy on top of that. Yes, we're in first name basis in case you're wondering, and that just makes it all the more dramatic. So it's really well done. And I would say, as far as like the morals and that kind of thing. It's all very realistic, and like he already has a wife, so they're already grown up and been in this like relationship for a long time, and you can see how like since you're in Lewis's head, how he looks at his wife, and then how she kind of surprises him, and then like they'll talk about something, and they're like, one is dealing with death, and he's like, that's not how I thought you felt at all. How are we going to raise this kid who's already of age to know about these kinds of things? And they've already had like the talk, like sex talk with her. So like, now isn't it time to talk about death? And she doesn't want to talk about death, but then they have a cat, and then Pet Cemetery comes in, and there's stuff happening, and it's like, we got to talk about death. I deal with death every day. Boom, plot. And not only a plot basically surrounded about grief and dealing with death and loss and all that kind of stuff. And each character in the book has dealt with a lot of that, so it's like interesting to get their perspectives. And that's basically the whole premise of the entire book. In most of my reviews, I do world building, but basically it's in real life, so there's not a whole lot of world building. It's cool that they're out in the country, and that has to do with a lot of it. And they're like kind of alone and isolated, and then like the new place they moved to, so because Lewis was trying to get away from the big city because of all this death he was seeing every day, and he's like, I'm gonna take a break of it, and then it basically just follows him. So sucks for you, Lewis. But now there's like different dangers out in the country. The country folk are living dangerous out there. Not really in this book, but it does add a big perspective. But world building is not a huge thing. It's just like you're in the country, you're on basically like a ranch, you have a bunch of space to yourself. World building. Got it. And as far as like magic goes, which there's magic in this, again, I'll fight you over it. The magic is cool because like it exists, and it's hinted at pretty much the whole time, especially like people in the area talk about it. So then like it's there, and basically from the get-go kind of what the book plot's about, and it's basically in the blurb, so you basically know already. Once you start getting farther and farther, you realize all the hints that you were witnessing were really more relevant than you thought, and things that are going the way they're going because they're going this way because of other things to do with the magic and other stuff, and like, wow, and it's good right at the end, and the magic really shows you how much it's been in this whole time, and like, it's pretty crazy. It gets really crazy at the end, which if you don't like setups, I would say it's worth it at the end just to see how it ends, which we'll talk about in a second. First, I want to talk about the fight. I like to talk about fight scenes in all my reviews. Technically, there's like a couple fight scenes, but obviously it's not a fighting book, so the fight scenes were just realistic. It wasn't like magic blast from my hands, fireball, it's not that kind of fantasy. So it's like, oh, punch to the face to then run away fight scene, if that makes sense. Or like, I'm not going to spoil stuff, but basically that's what it's like. And it was very realistic, and everything in this entire book felt really realistic, and you can see everyone's point of view. And especially when you start getting into the backstories of the other characters, you can see why they think the way they think, and why the wife pushes it away, and why everyone has different reactions. And it's like not super long like a bunch of fantasy books, so I would say it's worth the wait. And that leads us right into the end, which is one of my favorite endings ever. It's staggering. That's like the only non-spoiler way I can put it. And I'll also leave you with, at the very beginning of the audiobook, which I was privileged to read part of it in the audiobook, so it was really well done. Stephen King says in interviews before that he thinks that this is his scariest book, not because of the scares, but because of how he resolved it and how he interpreted grief. So I hope you trust me that it's crazy. If you haven't seen the movie or spoiled the ending, you don't need to know more. That's all. Right, so let's get into the summary. We got this little situation where our boy Lewis is tired of seeing death. He's a doctor, he sees it all the time, he's tired of it. He takes his family, wife, kid. There's other reasons. His wife's dad is kind of a douche the whole book, and he's a big reason they move. The death, because he's in a city, is a big reason he moves. They moved all the way out into the country. Not really sure why they did that. So right at the beginning, you kind of see how twisted Lewis is. They're doing their little road trip. The daughter's complaining. The wife's having a terrible time. And he's just thinking a little bit of the crazy thoughts, like maybe I'll pull this car into a tree, that kind of thing. We all have them, right? Right. So they get to the new farm. They find the new place. It's old, a little rundown, but it's pretty nice. The wife's happy about it. The daughter's excited, new area. Then he has his son, which I forgot to even mention in the whole video. My bad. Who's really young, still learning to talk. That age right there, I don't have kids. I don't know what age that is. Pretty young, that's the age. Right, so right at the beginning, the little boy, he gets a little stingy in the throat, and that's where you meet this new neighbor Judd, who comes over and takes it out of him, and he says, howdy partner. He doesn't really do that voice, but I like it better. And he pulls his stinger out and he's like, let me show you the ropes. And then Lewis immediately, who doesn't normally like a lot of people, was like, that's my dad now. Not really, but basically he was like father figure from that point on already. Hits the thing. It gets it going right there. So after that, he introduces it to his wife, Judd, his wife. Forgot the name. She's actually a pretty big part. I just forgot it. My bad. Who's been having a lot of issues mentally and physically with her old age. They're about 80, if I didn't say that before. You meet the wife, she has a lot of problems physically and mentally with her old age, and Lewis is a little worried about this. Being a doctor, he feels manipulated, he always has to help everybody. I would too, I would never be a doctor in the first place, but the plot kind of goes along, set up, he gets a new job. He's basically at a university, and he's a doctor there, so if anything goes wrong, and on his first day, someone comes in there, Dad, kaput. But it's like in a very dramatic way, and leaves like a mental stain on Lewis because he just got out of this, So they go home, they're talking about it on the news and such, and it kind of brings the death theme into the book. The whole plot line, basically. And Rachel, the wife of Lewis, is now talking about it, seeing if he's okay, la-di-da-di-da, and they have discrepancies of how they should handle it with their daughter, and then they mention the cat, and the cat almost gets ran over by a truck, right? And that kind of stirs up the emotions, and the daughter's kind of taking the mom's side where she's like, no, don't tell me about death and all this, la-di-da. They do a whole lot of setting up after that, right? And then a big part of this, the pet cemetery, is when they first get there, Judd decides to take them around, show them a couple of things on their property, and one of the things is up an avenue in the mountains is the pet cemetery itself. People are planting it. It's kind of weird how everything is totally perfect in sync. But Judd says only the kids have been laying their pets here, and it's a pet cemetery. Go figure. So that'll be relevant later, cat, hint. So basically what happens is the wife and the daughter decide to go visit their parents after a while. They've been here, time skipped along. They go and visit, and while they're going to visit, would you know it, the dumb cat gets ran over. Oh my, what a terrible coincidence for Lewis. He now has to tell his daughter, who calls on the phone, that the cat's dead. But he didn't. He just said his normal stuff, la-di-da, and then hung the phone up, and he tells Judd, his neighbor, instead. They've been getting along, having beers every night. They're basically the bestest of friends. And Judd says, I got you, man. Don't worry, follow me. Then this is where it gets a bit spooky. So they go up to the pet cemetery. Lewis takes the cat to bury, creepy. And it's in the middle of the night, and instead of burying it in the pet cemetery, so instead they go past the pet cemetery and go over the deadfall. Not sure, they basically say, you go over the deadfall, the instructions exactly were, just trust me, don't look down, and keep walking, and then you'll survive. Earlier they were worried about it, it looks like they're gonna die, instead they just keep going. So basically they get across, again, dead at night, they can't see everything, and spooky stuff starts happening on the other side. He thinks he sees some people, he's hearing things, ghosts, creepy. They keep on walking for a while, they get really far. Lewis is basically dying of heat exhaustion, sweating. He keeps asking why we're here, all that kind of stuff, and then they get to a stopping point. And Judd says, bury the cat here. And Lewis says, what are we doing and why? But also he has this strong feeling that it just feels appropriate. So he does it. He takes more hours. It's taken forever. They bury the cat, cover it up. They do a great job. It was very specific that they did a proper job. Then they go back over the deadfall. So they go back down, it's still nightfall, and instead of it being super late like Lewis thinks, it was only a couple hours, like 2 maybe, or something like that. And then Judd basically goes all mysterious and goes, hey dude, don't worry about it, you'll get it tomorrow, we'll talk tomorrow, just take some sleep. Lewis feels like death basically, he's done all this hard work and everything, and he's like, whatever. No biggie. So he goes, he lays down, he's contemplating, how am I going to tell my daughter, blah, blah, blah. Stuff keeps going in his mind. Then he goes to bed. Then he wakes up, and guess what? Boom, cat's alive. Freaks him out a little bit, appropriate. He sees that not only is the kid alive, but he can tell some of the whiskers were messed up where he got hit, and stuff was stuck in his face where he got hit, and he smells weird. The cat's acting a bit different, and he goes, what's going on? And this whole time, Lewis is basically trying to justify everything in his mind. He's a doctor. He's using scientific terms. He's saying this could have happened, blah, blah, blah. Then he goes and talks to Judd that night. And Judd goes, let me tell you the backstory, right? A long time ago, there's a bunch of Indians. They used to live up there. They thought it was a spiritual ground. It's basically magic. Let me sum it up to that. And they bring things back to life. Then he starts asking questions. Judd's a little mysterious. They stop talking. It's late that night. Then we skip to the next phase. The daughter comes home. She finds that the cat's kind of weird. She's kind of not into the cat anymore, because it smells bad all the time, it acts way different, that kind of thing. Things start getting weird with the cat relationship, and she's starting to turn into Lewis's side, saying, I think I could handle it if there was death. Death keeps happening. So basically the environment of the whole house is changing, right? And then another night, he's talking to Judd again, and he's asking, hey, has anyone buried a person up there? And Judd's appalled. He tells him, no, never. That's the dumbest idea. Don't even say that. No, right? And things go along. There's some time skips again. Everything's going dandy. Then poor old Judd's wife dies. Then things get kicking to the third gear. And it's been about years since the Lewis family's moved in here, so they've really dealt with it for a long time. Judd's handling it well. As someone who has lost your loved one and everything's going along, Lewis is a part of the ceremony. He buries them. They bury the wife. Things are happening. Not in the pet cemetery, right? They bury her normally. Things are going along, and you basically get another dose of how someone deals with death. Then you go to Rachel. Obviously, they're all broken up and mixed up. They've been having problems fighting because they're about this death, and if the cat died, and they got mad at each other, and they had a fight, and now they're apologizing to each other, and she's telling her why it gets so offensive. Basically, she had a sister back in the day who had some really bad problems as a child. She was never right. Her back was getting twisted up. I don't remember the whole story, but basically she died and she thought it was her fault, and it really is tormenting her this whole time. Anyways, we continue for a while longer, then boom, boom, another terrible thing happens. Kaplowy, spoiler alert. This is a real spoiler alert. You want to go away if you're not spoilers, right? Anyways, Kaplowy, Gage is dead, hits it by a truck. That's right, the little boy is dead. Lewis loses his mind, the whole family, everyone loses their mind. It's all dramatic. Then they go to the funeral, they bury him. They bury the child. Rachel and the daughter are really messed up as well, but Lewis can't get out of his funk and like raise the kid. They're having drama with her dad, who's been a douchebag the whole time. It's going crazy. Then a couple days later, he has the thought, you know what? I know what I'm gonna do. Pet Sematary. This kid, I'm not even gonna continue. It's wild, dude. This is where the ending is. Go check it out. I'm not gonna spoil it. That's all.